Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today, inshallah, we'll start what we call it object-oriented programming concepts. Now, what we will learn today, inshallah, is something related to learning outcome 10, which apply different access specifier and static keyword. To know what is the use of the static words and what is the access modifier. We already use the access modifier anyway, right? So in order to know that, we have to know the class and its members. We know that if we have a class, the class will have an attribute and will have behavior. This behavior will be what? Will be methods. Now, each of these attributes or or methods inside the class will have access modifier, and we may give him like static or non-static members, and also sometimes we need a constructor and we practice how to create a constructor. We will also learn how to create a getter and setter for the class. Now, the main concept that we study in object-oriented programming is called encapsulation. When we say encapsulation, we mean by that is what? Is hiding something inside what? Inside something. So it's like a capsule. Imagine the class. This is the class. It's like a capsule, okay? And these capsule methods and attributes are what? Encapsulated inside the class. And if anyone want to access these methods from outside the class, okay, from inside the class it's fine because you are a member. But from outside the class you need a permission, and we need to give you something to access some of the data. And this is all restriction. So we're doing some restriction on the attributes and the method inside the class, because you cannot use this method directly or use it in your own way. You have to stick with our way in dealing with these methods. So some of the methods will be visible, other method will be what? Will be protected, other method will be public for everyone, other method will be invisible. No one can use it. It's just only for this class. Okay, so how we do that? How we do implement the encapsulation inside Java program? That's a very easy and simple one. Okay, now first of all, in any class you need to declare what? You need to declare what? A variable, and we know how to declare the variable, and sometimes we call them fields, sometimes we call them attributes, okay, and sometimes we call them what? Parameters or argument or whatever names inside the program. It's still uh, they are variables in anywhere, okay. And sometimes we call them local variables, sometimes we call them a global variable, okay. So this is the way how we do it, all right. So when you write a program like a class or any class, okay, you identify the variable. These variable, if they are inside the same method, we call them local method, local variable. If they are inside the class, everyone inside the class can use them, we can say they are global variable, okay. We'll see how is it different between that, okay. For example, you have a bicycle class, and the bicycle class contain, for example, this variable: integer cadence, integer gear, integer speed. As you can see that these are a public variable, and that means that everyone can access these variables. They are public, they are visible to everyone to update the variable, get the value of the variable, and so on. You identify any variable, you have to specify basically three things. This is the first part when you identify a variable, second part, and the third part. Now, the first part, we call it what? We call it access modifier. We call it what? Access modifier. This access modifier actually specify how how the others methods or the other class will access this variable. Okay, so it could be like public. It could be public. By default, it's what? By default, or it could be private. By default, it's a private. If you don't put anything, it's a private. Okay, and it could be what? It could be also what? Protected. Could be what? protected. So these access modifier, when you say public, it means what? It means anyone in the package, either in the same class or another class in the same package, can have access to this variable. When you say private, it means what? It means this variable belongs to this class and no one accesses it without permission. Okay, no one accesses this variable without permission. And protected means what? Mean this variable can be accessed but with a restriction somehow, with some restriction. And then after that, you have to put the type. The type could be primitive type or data type. So for example, you can put integer, you can put double, you can put string, any type. You can put string. This is data type. We already know how that. And then after that, you put the variable what? Name. The variable name can be any name. And you have to stick with the rules. What's the rules? No space. You cannot use number at the beginning. You cannot use keywords and so on. Okay? So this is how we actually identify the variable. You already practiced that, but you have to know the component of the when you identify the variable. Now, access modifier and type and name are three components when you identify any or declare any variable. Okay, so similar to what we did here, actually, we identify this is the access modifier is public, and this is public access modifier. This is the data type, the second part, and the third part is the name of the what is the name of the variable. So when you identify any variable, these are the three components required to declare any variable. Now the public keyword, as I said, it means that this variable is public for everyone. Everyone can access this variable. All right, as we said, we already spoke about the public modifier and the private modifier. The public modifier, we said, is accessible from all classes, not only just this class. Private modifier means what? Means this is only accessible inside the class. So if you want to access this method, this variable, you have to access it through the class. This is all happening because of what? Because we need to do some encapsulation. So to do the encapsulation, always if you want to encapsulate the variable and protect it, you always what? Make it what? Make it private. Make it what? Private. When you do it as a private, that means you encapsulate the variable. You hide the variable inside the class. And that is mean what? That means this variable cannot be accessed directly. So if you have a class and you set this variable x, for example, as a private variable, that means other classes, okay, when they call the method, this x method, they want to execute x method, okay, they stop here on the border, on the capsule. Wait a second, you cannot call the method directly. You want the x, I will do it for you. So the class will go and do something and give it back to the method in order that. But if it's a public, like y is a public, okay, if y is a public and this one want to access y, it goes directly to y, okay. This is the difference between a private and public modifier, okay. So that means if you have public, then you can access it directly. But if you have a private member, then you have to you can access it, but in a direct way. In a direct way, and I'm the class owner, control the access way that you will have to access its member if it's a private. This is an example, okay? This is the bicycle example. So we have a class called bicycle. This is the name of the class, okay? And this is the class is public, okay? And it's a class, all right? So this is the start of the class, and this is the end of the class is right here in the second section, okay? The second section right here. This is the end, start and the end of the class. Okay, now, perfect. Let's say that, okay, what are the attributes inside the class? Okay, So the attribute inside the class, we have this one here. I'm going to draw it right here. So this is the class called bicycle. This is the bicycle class, and this class contains this attribute, cadence. And this one is a private, so I put minus. And also the gear is what? The gear also private. And the last one is speed. Speed is also what? A private variable. So we have these variables, and they are all integers. So we put the access modifier as a private. This is the first part. And we put the type, and then after that the name of the variable. 3 times. And the same thing with other variable. Okay? So these variables are what? Private. Then if they are private, we're doing what? We're doing encapsulation. So each class need what? A constructor. A constructor. And remember last time in our example, when we create a shop class, we create a constructor for the class. The constructor is basically the same name as the class. See, this is the name of the class. It is the same name as the class, and this is public always. Why do we need this constructor? Because when you take an instance from the class, you will say what? You will say here, you will say, for example, bicycle. You write the name of the class, bicycle X equal new what? Bicycle. And you put like this, new. If you want to use a new, you need to have what? You need to have a constructor for the class. And the constructor should be public. All right. Now this constructor take 3 variables. Okay. 3 variables. The first one is called start cadence, and it's an integer. And then start speed, and then start gear. And it set up the value for the gear, and for the cadence, and for the speed. So you can create a bicycle and give it a value here. Say, for example, give it this cadence 2, and the start speed is 1, and the start gear is 1. So you create a bicycle object, and this bicycle object, when you create it, now x dot cadence here will be equal to 2, and x dot speed will be equal to 1 as you specified here, and x dot gear, the gear one here, will equal to 1, because this is the order. Now the 1 will come here, and the 1 will come here, and the 2 will come here. So when you do that equal, now this one will be equal to what? Will equal to 1. This one will be equal to 2, and this one will be equal to 1. So the constructor is used to initialize what? To initialize the variable inside the. You can have a full constructor that contain 3 things. All right. This is the benefit of having a constructor, because we identify this variable as a private. We need to put 2 functions for each variable. We need to have 2 functions for each variable. This function is called get, and the second function is called what? Set. Now the set and get are necessary if you have what? If you have a private variable. For each private variable, you need what? You need set and get function. You can see that here, that for example, we have get cadence. This get cadence for the variable what? Cadence. Okay, and we have also set cadence. Okay, set cadence. Now the get cadence, it should be return type, the same as the type of the cadence, and it should be public. The get and set always public. The get will have the same type as the variable. So cadence is what? Is an integer. So the function should be an integer, the get, and it will return the value of the variable. So it's return cadence. So return cadence, it should return an integer value, right? And also here we have the set. Set is always void, and take value and set it there. So you send the variable a value, and this value will be saved where? Into the variable. So you either set the variable value, or you want to print out or get the variable value, that because it's private. Because what? It is private. Now that's what happens when you do the encapsulation basically. So if you have this method called cadence, this variable cadence, and it's a private, if someone wants to access it, as we said, the class will stop in here and go and access the sadness using what? Using either get or set. Get or set inside the class, and will return anything. If there's anything returned to the call, it will return it back because it's what? It's a private. So in summary, each variable defined as a private need to have a getter and setter functions. The getter and setter function will be the same name as the variable and the same type as the variable, and we just put get and the variable name, and the first letter should be what? Capital. The first letter should be capital, and we said, and the first letter capital. The get has only one statement: return the variable name, and also the set have one statement: will set up the variable value. Set up the variable value to new value. You send the new value, and this new value will be saved where? Into the variable. All right. And same thing also, we need to have a get and set for each variable identified as a private. The class has other functions, okay, extra functions, and we learn how to write function inside and outside the class. So this is the first function, and this is the second function. It's about the speed. If you apply a brake, that means you decrease the speed. If you apply speed up, that means you increase what? The speed. So there's two functions, and this function does not return, this function do not return anything, okay, and they just take one variable, integer value. Now static member. When you identify any variable or any method as a static, that means this variable or this method is attached to the class, is tied with the class, okay, is tied with the class. And there's always a main function. The main function is always what? Is static. That means this main function is tied to the class. You can have also a variable as a static. You can have method as a static. It is up to you. Now, when you identify it as a static, you should use the static word. So, for example, this method, this variable is called integer a. A is an integer, and it's a static. What does it mean, static? Static means it's tied to this class. Okay? It is a normal variable, similar when you say public integer a, but the only difference is there is no static. So the static will specify the way that we access the variable. All right? Here, for example, you can put it before the access modifier or after the access modifier. We actually prefer to put it after, this way, the standard way. But this is an example. We have a class called math unit. Okay, the math util has a function, a static function, and this static function is called what? Add, and this add is received two variable, integer a and integer what? B, and return what? Return the sum of a and b. All right. Now, to use this add, you cannot use it directly because it's a static. You only can call it from a static method, okay? And you cannot type the name. You have to use the class name. Why we have to use the class name? Because it's attached to the class. So I cannot say, for example, I cannot say add like this, 2 and 3, and I cannot say, for example, integer x equal add 2 and 3. This is not correct. You have to say it this way. This is impossible. You have to say it this way. Integer x equal the name of the class, math, util dot add. Okay, you have to say it this way, dot add, and give it 2 and 3. Why is that? Because the function is attached to the class. If you want to call the function or use the variable, you have to use what? You have to use the class name, because this static means what? Mean it is attached to the what? It's attached to the class. Okay? Same way for the variable. If you have a static variable, you have to mention the class name. If you have a static variable inside, like static public, for example, public static t integer t, for example, and if you want to access t, you have to say what? You have to say math util, for example, dot t equal 5, for example. So because what? Because t is static and you cannot use it without mentioning the class name. This is an example. Okay, so for example here we have the main method. The main method is always what? The main method is always static. Okay, now I can show you something. I have created this program for you actually, and we can see that last time we create a method, and this is the main method. So here this method is static. If I remove static from here, okay, it is not static. All right, and I will have an error here. Why do we have an error? Because the main method is what? Is static, and in order to access anything, everything need to be what? Static. Everything need to be what? Static. Okay, and static has to be what? In this side. So if you put static, that should be fine. That should be what? No error. This is why, because the main method is static, and in order to access any method, the method has to be what? Has to be static method. This is why we put what? Static here in front of this one. If you have a static variable as well, let's say here, for example, public integer, for example, var. Okay, var equal 8, for example. Okay, if I say here var equal 6 or 7, that's not gonna happen. Why is that? Because var is not static and I am accessing it from a static method. So this has to be what? A static variable. Okay, this has to be what? Look at the method, and the error here shows you what? Non-static variable cannot be referenced from static context. But if I put here static, then there should be no problem. So if you specify static, then everything has to be accessed by static methods. If you try to access it from non-static method, then that gives you an error. Okay. Now, what's the difference between static and non-static? Okay, the only difference, if you have a static method, this static method can call what? This static method can call static only. Static methods and variable. Static method and static variable. Only static method and static variables. Okay? But if the method is non-static, like this one, if it's just a public method somehow non-static, it can access both static and non-static. Example, static variable here, or static method here, you can what? You can have static math till get math function. This is a static variable. It's a static method. Okay. Here, for example, you can say to call this method, you have to say mention the class name. Why is that? Because it's a static method, as we said. Okay. Even if it's a variable or attribute, you have to mention the class name. We already explained that before. Okay. If it's in the same class, you can just write the name of the variable. But if it's from outside the class, you have to mention the class name dot class variable name. Now, if you want to declare a variable as a static, you just put static before the data type. You just put static, and then after that the data type, and then you can give it a value. So here, in order to print this variable a, we have to use the class name. Why is that? Because it's a static. A is what?